I remember that afternoon like a bruise that never fades, the kind that looks healed until you press on it. Rain hammered against my windshield, drowning out the sound of my own ragged breathing. I was parked right outside the Carter Waste Management headquarters, the same building where I'd spent every weekday for the past 6 months staring at the message glowing on my phone. Effective immediately. Your employment with Carter Waste is terminated. Please return all company property by end of day. It was signed by my mother, the company's CFO. No explanation, no meeting. Just a line that cut deeper than any knife. Terminated. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. Terminated. By my own parents. I wanted to scream, but the sound just stuck in my throat. The kind of silence that hurts. The parking lot was empty, the sky churning gray, and all I could see was my reflection in the glass-wet hair, eyes red from exhaustion. The same blue uniform I'd worn since my first day. How did it come to this? Only a few months ago, I was walking across the graduation stage at Ohio State, full of hope. I thought my parents were proud of me first in the family to earn a degree. That night, they'd toasted me with champagne and said, "You're the future of the Carter name, Emily." I'm in stitch, but the next morning, that future turned into a full-time job at their company, not in some cozy office, but on the back of a garbage truck. I agreed. I wanted to prove I wasn't some spoiled daughter living off her parents' empire. I wanted to earn it. But now, sitting there drenched in that gray rain, all I could think about was the words my father had told me weeks before everything collapsed. If you can't handle the dirt, you'll never deserve the gold. At the time, I thought he meant hard work. Now, I wasn't so sure, because somewhere between hauling trash and digging through recycling bins, I'd stumbled on something my family didn't want me to see, and firing me their own daughter was the only way to shut me up. I stared at the company sign one last time, its bold white letters glistening under the rain. Carter Waste Management, built on grit, they said. Built on honesty. If only that were true. I wiped my face, started the engine, and whispered to myself. They wanted to bury me, but they forgot I've seen what's under the dirt. And I had no idea then that the real filth wasn't in the dumpsters. But I didn't know that the biggest shock was still waiting inside that house, the one where I grew up. When people in Cedar Ridge talked about the Carters, they said our name with a kind of conflicted respect. We weren't royalty, but we might as well have been. My parents owned the largest waste management company in 3 counties. Every trash bin, recycling truck, and landfill had our name stamped on it. Carter Waste. Our family home sat on a hill overlooking the town, a brick mansion with white pillars and a long driveway that always smelled faintly of pine and diesel fuel. My dad, Robert Carter, was the kind of man who built his empire from calloused hands and clever deals. He loved to tell people how he started with one beat-up truck and a dream. My mom, Linda, handled the books calm, precise, and always dressed like she was walking into a board meeting. At dinner, conversations weren't about feelings or dreams. They were about contracts, routes, and city bids. I grew up watching my dad make phone calls during dessert and my mom balance invoices while I did homework beside her. Family and business weren't separate. They were the same thing, stitched together like the seams of a uniform. After college, I thought maybe I'd help expand the company, bring in sustainability programs, clean energy, maybe a fresh face for the Carter name. But my dad had other plans. He sat me down in his office the day after graduation, mahogany desk, framed city awards on the wall, and said, "If you want to run this company someday, you'll start from the bottom. No fancy titles, no desk job. You'll wear the uniform, punch the clock, and work like everyone else." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He handed me a pair of steel-toe boots and a company badge that read Emily Assistant Crew. Mom smiled softly, like she admired the idea. "It'll build character," she said. So that Monday, I showed up at the city yard before sunrise. No one knew who I was, not the drivers, not the dispatchers. I wore the same Navy uniform and kept my mouth shut. I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to see the real heartbeat of the business. The first few weeks were humbling. The smell, the sweat, the sheer physical exhaustion, it stripped away my pride. I began to respect the people who kept our streets clean. These men and women worked through storms, Heat waves, broken equipment, and still laughed through it all. I started feeling proud of the job, proud to be part of something real. But then, the jokes began. The subtle digs. Ron, the senior crew lead, started calling me college girl. If I finished early, he'd hand me his extra route. If I questioned it, he'd laugh and say, "Welcome to the real world, sweetheart." I told myself it was just part of earning respect. Every rookie goes through it, right? But something about his smirk made me uneasy, like he knew more about me than he should. Still, I kept my head down, kept showing up, kept proving I could take it. Until one day, I realized the trash I was collecting wasn't the only thing that smelled rotten, and soon, I'd find out exactly why. There's something strange about the way people look at you when you're wearing a fluorescent vest, like you're invisible, but somehow still in their way. Every morning, I'd ride in the passenger seat of a dented white truck with Ron, the crew lead who'd been with the company since before I was born. He was in his mid-50s, gray stubble, sunburned skin, and a cigarette always hanging off his lip like a punctuation mark to his cynicism. The first week, he didn't say much, just gave orders, quick and sharp. By the second week, he started with jokes, small ones that stung a little too much to laugh off. "Didn't think college taught you how to lift a bin, huh? Don't break a nail, sweetheart." I bit my tongue. Every single time. I told myself it was temporary, a test. My dad had done this, hadn't he? Worked his way up. I wanted to earn that same respect. By week 4, my body ached in places I didn't know existed. My hands blistered, my shoulders screamed, and my uniform never seemed clean, no matter how many times I washed it. But the strange thing was, I started to feel proud of that. There's a rhythm to manual work, a kind of grounding that comes from sweat and exhaustion. The other workers, Miguel, Ray, and Cassie, became like a small, gritty family. They'd share lunch breaks, stories, sometimes even cover my route when I was running behind. Except Ron. He watched everything. He'd find small reasons to humiliate me. "You missed that bin," or "You're holding the compactor wrong." It didn't matter how well I did my job. He always found something to correct. One afternoon, after a 12-hour shift, he tossed a heavy metal bin my way. "You forgot to clean out the back. That's your job, rookie." The back of the truck reeked of rot maggots, soaked cardboard, spoiled meat. I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't mine to clean this time, but everyone else had already clocked out. So I did it. Alone. In the dark. As I hosed the filth down the drain, I caught my reflection in the metal siding, tired, dirty, unrecognizable. For a second, I thought about walking away. But I didn't, because I wanted to prove that I could survive this, that I wasn't just the boss's daughter. Then, one rainy morning, Ron pushed things too far. We were already short-handed, rushing to meet the city deadline. Roads slick, bins overflowing. Ron suddenly tossed his gloves in the cab and said, "I'm out. You can finish the rest." "Ron, we still have 2 routes left." He smirked. "You're the new one. You handle it. I've got better things to do." I felt something snap inside me. The exhaustion, the disrespect, the months of swallowing my pride, it all boiled over. "No, Ron, not today. I'm not doing your job too." He froze. Then that cruel grin crept across his face. "Careful. Management might not like it if I start talking about your attitude." For a second, fear flickered in my chest. Then I met his stare and said quietly, "Then let's go to management right now." He blinked, didn't say another word, just turned and walked off, leaving me standing in the rain, shaking, furious, and strangely, free. It was the first time I'd stood up for myself on that job. But what I didn't know was that, by doing that, I'd just drawn a target on my back. And the storm that followed would make that rain feel like mercy. It started small. Little things you could almost ignore: a broken lock on the truck garage, paperwork missing from my locker, whispers that stopped when I walked into the break room. After the incident with Ron, the air around me changed. The friendly chatter from Miguel and Cassie faded to polite nods. People started avoiding eye contact. Someone had clearly said something, I just didn't know what yet. Then, a few days later, I overheard my name in the worst possible place, the smoking area behind the recycling bay. Ron's voice cut through the hum of the machinery. "Told you she's not one of us. Daddy's company, Daddy's money." Thinks she's better than the rest of us. I froze behind the wall. My stomach sank. They knew. The secret I'd kept that I was Robert Carter's daughter was out. And somehow, it didn't just leak. It spread like poison. The next week was hell. I got the worst assignments, solo routes, overflow shifts, the landfill runs nobody wanted. Management suddenly started reviewing my performance. My supervisor, Mark, cornered me after a shift with a smirk that said more than his words ever could. "We've had complaints about your attitude. You might want to remember whose company this is." The irony made me laugh, just not out loud. Still, I kept working. I told myself it was just hazing, that if I kept my head down, things would blow over. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was 4:30 a.m. The sky was still dark, mist curling over the asphalt. I was checking the truck before the route when I noticed something odd. One of the barrels in the back wasn't on the manifest. It was sealed shut, labeled only with a red X. "Hazardous waste," I muttered. "That's not on today's schedule." When I asked dispatch about it, they brushed me off. "Just take it to Zone 12, Carter's orders." But Zone 12 wasn't a recycling site. It was the old Benton Quarry, an inactive landfill that hadn't been used in years. And when I got there, Ron's truck was already waiting. He didn't say a word, just motioned for me to back in next to him. When I hesitated, he grinned. "Don't overthink it, sweetheart, just dump it." He climbed back into his cab and drove off before I could ask anything else. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about that red X barrel kept flashing in my head. So the next morning, before anyone arrived, I checked the dump logs. No entry for Zone 12. No record of any hazardous load. And the craziest part? The order approving the disposal was signed digitally by my mother. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Ron's doing. Someone higher up was involved. Someone in the office wanted those barrels gone. Quietly. The company I thought I was learning to lead was hiding something deep and dirty. I started to dig. And what I found next didn't just make me sick, it broke me. Because the filth I uncovered didn't come from the ground, it came from my own family. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that red X, glowing in the dark like a warning sign from hell. So, I did what any restless, suspicious daughter would do. I broke into my mother's office. It was a Saturday, and the building was empty except for the low hum of the vending machines. I knew her password. She'd used the same one for everything since I was 16. Carter Legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I logged into her computer, heart pounding so hard I thought it would echo off the glass walls. At first, everything looked normal. Contracts, invoices, expense reports. Then I found a folder buried deep inside the archives, named Special Disposal. When I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. There were dozens of files. Photos of industrial waste barrels, like the one I'd seen, GPS coordinates, fake disposal receipts stamped with the city's logo, and every single one had been approved with my mother's signature. It got worse. A memo labeled Compliance Meeting showed that the EPA had already fined Carter Waste last year for illegal dumping. The fine had been quietly paid, the incident sealed, and the whistleblower fired for misconduct. I sat there, frozen. My mother, the woman who'd lectured me about integrity and discipline, was falsifying environmental reports. And Ron? He wasn't just a bully. He was their cleanup guy. Literally. He made sure the dirty jobs stayed buried, along with anyone who might talk. I printed everything. Every email, every file, every signature. I didn't even think about what I'd do with it. I just knew I needed proof. When I got home that night, my father was waiting at the kitchen island, a whiskey in his hand. The moment I saw him, I knew. He knew. "Long day?" he asked, voice calm, too calm. "Yeah," I said. "You could say that." "Ugh." He smiled faintly, swirling the ice in his glass. "You've been asking questions at work, about things that don't concern you." The air between us tightened. "They do concern me," I said. "You're dumping toxic waste in restricted zones. You and Mom are covering it up." "Enough." His voice cracked like thunder. For a second, I thought he might actually hit me. But instead, he just took a slow sip and said, "You think you're better than us? You think that degree makes you some kind of hero? You wouldn't have a roof over your head without the deals I made. Mom stepped in from the hallway, her face pale, trembling. Please, Emily, she whispered. Don't do this. You don't understand how deep this goes. That's when I realized it wasn't fear of punishment in her eyes, it was fear of exposure. I stared at both of them. My parents, two people I'd loved, trusted, and worked my bones for, and saw strangers. They weren't protecting a company, they were protecting themselves. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me cold. If you walk out that door, you're no longer part of this family. I didn't look back, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing them. They'd already lost me. But I didn't know that the next time I faced them, it wouldn't just be in our kitchen. It would be in front of an audience. It took me 3 days to stop shaking. 3 days of silence from my parents. 3 days of showing up to work, pretending everything was fine while my insides screamed. Then, one Sunday evening, I got a text from my mother. Family dinner. 7 p.m. We need to talk. No emojis. No warmth. Just cold precision. I almost didn't go. But something inside me, maybe anger, maybe closure, told me I had to. I needed to hear them say it. When I walked into that house, it didn't even smell like home anymore. It smelled like expensive furniture, polish, and fear. My father was already at the table, carving steak with the same focus he gave his business deals. My mother poured herself a glass of wine without meeting my eyes. We sat in silence for a while, the air so tense it felt solid. Then my father finally said, "We know what you found." I didn't flinch. Good. Then we can stop pretending. He sighed, as if I was the disappointment in the room. You don't understand what it takes to run a company like this. We employ over 200 families, Emily. You think the city gives a damn about regulations when the streets are full of trash? Sometimes you bend rules to keep people fed. Bend? I said quietly. You buried toxic waste, Dad. You lied to the government. You risked lives. Enough, he barked, slamming his hand on the table. You're our daughter, not our judge. My mother's voice broke through, trembling but soft. Sweetheart, please, if this gets out, we'll lose everything. The house, the contracts, everything we've built. I looked at her mascara, perfect pearls, glinting under the chandelier, and wondered if she'd always been this fragile, or if I'd just never noticed before. Then maybe you should have built something honest, I said. Her eyes filled with tears. But she didn't argue. She didn't have to. The guilt was written all over her face. That's when my father leaned back, voice low and deliberate. You're going to delete those files, Emily, right now, before you ruin your family, before you ruin yourself. I smiled just a little. Funny you should say that. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. The screen was still recording. My father's face drained of color. You're recording this? Yeah, I said calmly. Because every time you call me a liar, I want to remember the sound of your voice proving me right. He stood up so fast his chair slammed into the floor. You're finished here. You're fired. You hear me? You're out of my company, out of my will, out of my house. My mother tried to reach for him, but he shoved her hand away. She made her choice, he said, his voice trembling with rage. Let her live with it. Of fact, I gathered my things, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't even look back as I walked to the door, because the moment I stepped outside, I felt lighter. Terrified, yes, but free. That night, as I drove away, my phone buzzed. It was a company email, effective immediately. Your employment with Carter Waste is terminated for insubordination and misconduct. The exact same words I'd see again. Hours later, sitting in that rainy parking lot, I pulled over, opened my laptop, and stared at the folder I'd hidden on a flash drive, the one labeled Legacy Truth. They wanted me gone. Fine. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because if they thought firing me would silence me, they had no idea who they'd raised. The night they fired me, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead, I felt this strange electric calm, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to jump. I spent that whole week in my tiny apartment with the blinds closed, combing through every file I'd copied from my mom's computer. Emails, fake disposal records, payment transfers to consultants that traced straight back to Ron's shell company. The evidence was airtight, and I knew what I had to do. At first, I called the EPA hotline, but after hours of hold music and bureaucratic disinterest, I realized I needed something faster and louder. So I went to the press. There was a local investigative reporter named Dana McKay, a woman known for taking down corrupt city officials and dirty contractors. I'd read her articles growing up. She was fearless. I emailed her the files under an alias. She called me within 20 minutes. "If what you sent me is real," she said, her voice low and sharp, "this isn't just a story, it's a scandal." We met the next day at a diner off Highway 47. I slid her the flash drive across the booth, hands shaking. "Just promise me one thing," I said. "If you publish this, don't protect the Carters." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're one of them, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. 2 weeks later, the story broke. Carter Waste Empire under federal investigation, illegal dumping, bribery, and fraud uncovered. The news hit Cedar Ridge like a bomb. TV trucks lined the streets. Employees were questioned. The EPA raided the headquarters. My father was escorted out in handcuffs while cameras flashed. My mother, pale, shaking, refused to speak to reporters. Ron? He was arrested the next morning trying to skip town. For days, I couldn't turn on the TV without seeing our name. My name. And then came the interviews. People I'd worked with, the ones who'd sneered at me, ignored me, they started speaking out. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd tried to silence. The corruption ran deep kickbacks, falsified safety reports, even political payoffs. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt empty. Because every time I saw my father's mugshot on the screen, or my mother being led into a courthouse, I remembered Sunday dinners, family vacations, Christmas mornings. They weren't monsters. They were people who let greed rot their souls one lie at a time. A month later, the city council reached out. They wanted someone to help oversee the cleanup contracts to rebuild trust with the community. I almost said no, but then I remembered why I started all this, to make things right. So I accepted. Not as a Carter, but as Emily, the girl who refused to bury the truth. The first day I walked back into that landfill, it felt different. The air was fresher. The workers nodded respectfully. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the boss's daughter. I felt like I'd earned my name. Still, sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can still smell that red X barrel, a ghost of everything we lost. But karma wasn't done yet. The empire that once ruled Cedar Ridge was about to crumble, and I'd have a front row seat. You'd think watching your parents fall from power would feel like victory. But when the news cameras left and the town quieted down, what was left didn't feel like justice. It felt like grief. Carter Waste Management collapsed within 6 months. The city terminated every contract, creditors seized the trucks, and our once iconic headquarters, the glass building that used to glow at night, became a ghost shell, boarded up and silent. I drove by it one evening, parked across the street, and just stared. The sign had been stripped down to its metal frame, but I could still see the faint outline of the letters. Carter. My name carved into something broken. Ron had taken a plea deal and was serving time in county jail. My father was indicted on multiple counts of fraud and environmental violations. He fought it, of course, claiming it was a setup, but the evidence was overwhelming. My mother took a lighter sentence, accessory charges, probation, community service. The same woman who once dined with city officials was now sorting recycling at a local facility. I found out by accident, on a random Thursday, when I was visiting the new site under city management. She didn't see me. She was standing by a conveyor belt, hair tied back, gloved hands trembling as she pulled glass bottles from the trash. For a long time, I just stood there, hidden behind a stack of bins, watching. A part of me wanted to walk up to her. Another part wanted to leave and never look back. Instead, I whispered, "Now you know what honest work feels like." And I left. The town began to heal slowly. The new company, run by a young environmentalist team from Columbus, hired back most of the workers, paid fair wages, and actually followed the rules. They even invited me to consult on sustainability and community outreach. At first, I hesitated. Then I realized this was my chance to build something new from the wreckage of the old. Something good. Every time I stepped onto that site, I felt a strange mix of pain and peace. The dirt smelled the same. The truck still rumbled, but the energy had shifted. No more lies, no more secrets. And yet, some nights, when I lay in bed, I'd still hear my father's voice echo in my head. If you can't handle the dirt, you'll never deserve the gold. He was right, just not in the way he meant. Because the real gold wasn't in the business, the power, or the name. It was in surviving what came after the loneliness, the shame, the rebuilding. A few months later, I got a letter. No return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. We lost everything, Emily. Your father still won't speak your name. But I hope someday you'll understand we did what we thought was right for the family. If forgiveness lives anywhere inside you, please let it breathe. I didn't reply. Because forgiveness isn't something you give to erase guilt. It's something you find to set yourself free. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and went back to work. Because my story wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about redemption, and mine was just beginning. It's been almost a year since everything fell apart. The dust has finally settled literally and figuratively. The landfill is now a clean energy project site, powered by solar panels and wind turbines. Every time I drive past, I see kids on school tours instead of EPA trucks. It's strange. Something that once represented shame now shines with possibility. I've changed too. After the investigation, the city offered me a permanent role helping redesign environmental systems, but I declined. I wanted to start something of my own, something untainted. That's how Carter Renewal was born, a nonprofit focused on sustainable waste solutions and community transparency. We teach schools, businesses, even small towns how to manage their waste without losing their integrity. It's not glamorous. I work long hours, write endless grant proposals, and live in a modest apartment above an old bakery. But for the first time, my days feel honest. My hands build instead of hide. Sometimes I still get calls from reporters asking for the whistleblower statement. They want scandal, sound bites, drama, but that's not the story anymore. The story is that even in the messiest corners of life, truth finds a way to breathe. I ran into my mother once at a local grocery store. She looked older, smaller, somehow. She smiled faintly, almost afraid to speak. I nodded, and that was enough. There were no apologies, no grand speeches. Just two people who finally understood that silence could be its own form of peace. As for my father, I haven't seen him since the sentencing. Last I heard, he's living in a small rental house on the edge of town, alone. I used to think I'd never forgive him, but time has a way of softening edges without erasing the past. I don't forgive what he did, but I forgive the part of him that didn't know how to love without control. One evening, I visited the old Carter headquarters, or what's left of it. The building's been gutted, the sign gone, only the steel frame glinting in the sunset. I walked through the cracked lot, felt the wind in my hair, and whispered, "You can't own people just because you gave them your name." That's the lesson my family taught me painfully, permanently. Family isn't about ownership. It's about respect. It's about choosing truth, even when it means standing alone. It's about knowing that love without honesty is just control in disguise. I turned toward my car, watching the horizon glow pink and gold. For the first time in years, I felt something that had nothing to do with guilt or revenge. Freedom. And if you've ever walked away from people who tried to bury your worth, know this: you didn't lose them. You found yourself.